Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. I've been working as an aircraft mechanic for Delta at DFW for about 8 years now, but what happened last October still makes my hands shake when I think about it. Back then, I was pulling the graveyard shift at Hangar 7, this massive maintenance facility about 3 miles from the main terminal. It's one of those places that feels completely cut off from the rest of the world, especially at night when it's just you, maybe one other tech, and rows of sleeping metal birds. I was 34, recently divorced, and honestly preferred the night shifts because it meant I didn't have to deal with management breathing down my neck. The pay differential didn't hurt either. I was saving up to buy a small house in Arlington, finally get my life back on track after Rachel took everything in the settlement. The first weird thing happened on a Tuesday night in early October. I remember because I'd just started working on a 737-800 that came in with a faulty hydraulic line. Around 2 a.m., I set my torque wrench down on the tool cart next to the aircraft's nose gear, went to grab some replacement O-rings from the supply closet maybe 50 feet away. When I came back, the wrench was gone. Not just moved, completely missing. I spent 20 minutes looking for it, checking under the plane, in the wheel wells. Even asked Marcus, the other tech working that night, if he'd borrowed it. He was clear on the other side of the hangar, working on an A320, hadn't moved from his spot. Eventually found the wrench sitting perfectly centered on the pilot's seat in the cockpit. The aircraft doors had been locked when I'd started my shift. Things got progressively stranger over the next few nights. The overhead lights in Bay 3 would flicker and die whenever I worked there, but the electricians found nothing wrong with the circuits. I'd hear footsteps on the metal catwalks above, but security sweeps always came up empty. One night I was safety wiring a fuel pump when every single work light in the hangar shut off simultaneously. Complete darkness for maybe 30 seconds, just long enough for me to feel my way to the emergency flashlight. When the lights came back on, all the cowlings I'd removed from the engine were stacked in a perfect pyramid formation on the hangar floor. That's when I started documenting everything, taking photos with my phone, writing down times and dates in a little notebook I kept in my coveralls. The real problem started the following week. I came in for my shift to find that someone had loosened the bolts on a critical flight control cable I'd secured the night before. Not just loosened, deliberately backed them off to the point where they were barely hanging on. This wasn't some prank or careless mistake. This was sabotage that could have killed people. My supervisor, Dale Morrison, called me into his office the next morning, asking why my signature was on the maintenance log for work that hadn't been completed properly. I showed him my photos from the previous night, proving I'd torqued everything to spec, but he just looked at me like I was making excuses. The way his eyes narrowed, the way he kept tapping his pen on the desk, I knew he thought I was either incompetent or lying. After that meeting with Dale, I started taking videos of my completed work, time-stamped and everything. I wasn't about to lose my job over whatever was happening in that hangar. The next few nights were quiet, almost too quiet, like whoever was messing with me was waiting for me to let my guard down. Then Thursday hit. I was replacing a worn brake assembly on a 757 when I heard it, the distinct sound of an aircraft door opening somewhere in the hangar. Not the main hangar doors, but a cabin door, that specific pneumatic hiss and thunk. Marcus was off that night, so I was completely alone. I grabbed my flashlight and started checking each plane, my heart hammering so hard I could hear it echo in the empty fuselages. Found it on the third aircraft I checked, an A319 scheduled for departure at 6 a.m. The forward cabin door was wide open, emergency slide still armed. If someone had tried to exit, it would have deployed, costing the airline tens of thousands in repairs and delays. But that wasn't what made my blood run cold. Inside the cockpit, someone had pulled every single circuit breaker. Not randomly either. They'd pulled specific ones that would have caused complete electrical failure about 20 minutes into flight. The auxiliary power unit, the backup generators, even the battery bus. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. I immediately called security, then Dale, then documented everything while waiting for them to arrive. Security pulled the footage from that night, and what they found changed everything. At 1:47 a.m., there was a figure on camera just for maybe 3 seconds. Tall, wearing what looked like our standard maintenance coveralls but with the hood pulled up, face completely obscured. The weird part was how they moved, almost gliding between the aircraft, never quite in full view of any camera. They knew every blind spot, every angle. The security chief, a former Air Force guy named Bryant, told me they'd never seen anything like it. The intruder had somehow gotten past 2 keycard checkpoints and a biometric scanner without triggering any alarms. Bryant asked if I'd noticed anyone following me lately, anyone asking about my schedule. That's when it hit me. This wasn't random. Someone was specifically targeting my shifts, my work. Dale actually apologized after seeing the footage, but I could tell he was rattled. The airline brought in their corporate security team, installed additional cameras, changed all the access codes. They even offered to move me to day shift, but I refused, partly because I needed the night differential pay, but mostly because I wanted to catch this person. Call it pride or stupidity, but I wasn't going to let some psycho drive me out of a job I'd worked hard for. Started carrying a heavy Maglite flashlight, the kind that doubles as a weapon. Marcus started volunteering for more night shifts too, said he didn't like the idea of anyone working alone anymore. We developed a check-in system, calling each other every hour. For a few nights it seemed to work. Everything came to a head on October 23rd. I remember the date because it was my daughter Emma's birthday, and I'd promised to video call her before her school started. It was around 3:30 a.m., and I was performing a routine inspection on a 737 MAX when I noticed something off about the cargo hold. The access panel was slightly ajar, which was impossible. I'd personally verified all closures at the start of my shift. As I approached with my flashlight, I saw it. Someone had tampered with the cargo fire suppression system. Not just tampered, they'd inserted some kind of device into the lines. My hands were trembling as I photographed it, knowing this wasn't just sabotage anymore. This was terrorism. I was backing away to call security when I heard breathing behind me. Not normal breathing, ragged, almost excited. I spun around with my flashlight raised and saw him standing maybe 10 feet away. Average height, thin build, wearing our maintenance coveralls with the hood up. But when my light hit his face, I recognized him immediately. It was Kevin Lawson, a mechanic who'd been fired 6 months earlier for failing a drug test. His eyes were bloodshot, pupils dilated, and he was smiling this horrible, twisted smile. "Hey, Mitchell," he said, voice hoarse like he'd been screaming. "Been wanting to talk to you about that report you filed." That's when it clicked. I'd been the one who'd noticed he was high on the job, had reported it to Dale as a safety concern. Kevin pulled out what looked like a modified box cutter. The blade extended way beyond normal. "You cost me everything," he hissed, taking a step closer. "My job, my benefits, my kids won't even talk to me anymore." I kept backing up, trying to keep distance between us while frantically thinking. My phone was in my tool cart 50 feet away. The emergency alarm was on the wall behind Kevin. He must have seen me glancing around because he laughed. This sick, broken sound. "Go ahead, run." I know every inch of this place. Been living in the ventilation system for weeks. Watching you. Learning your routine. The thought of him crawling around above me all those nights made my skin crawl. I gripped my Maglite tighter, calculating if I could reach him before he reached me. That's when Marcus appeared behind Kevin like a guardian angel, carrying a massive torque multiplier wrench. Kevin must have sensed him because he started to turn, but Marcus was already swinging. The wrench connected with Kevin's shoulder with a sickening crunch, sending him sprawling. The box cutter skittered across the hangar floor. While Marcus kept the wrench raised, I sprinted to the emergency alarm and pulled it. The hangar exploded with sirens and flashing lights. Kevin tried to crawl away, but his arm was clearly broken. He kept muttering about how we'd all pay, how he'd planted more devices, how the airline had destroyed his life. Security arrived within minutes, followed by the police and eventually the FBI. They found Kevin's makeshift camp in an abandoned section of the ventilation system. Sleeping bag, food wrappers, notebooks filled with diagrams of aircraft systems and our work schedules. He'd been planning this for months, living like a ghost in the infrastructure. They swept every aircraft and found 3 more devices, all designed to cause catastrophic failures during flight. The investigation revealed he'd been using stolen credentials from a janitor he'd befriended before his termination. Kevin's currently serving 25 to life in federal prison. I still work nights at Hangar 7, but now there's always at least 3 of us on shift and security does hourly walkthroughs. Sometimes when I'm working alone on an aircraft, I still hear phantom footsteps above me. Marcus says I've got PTSD, and maybe he's right, but I'd rather be paranoid than dead. The airline gave me a commendation and a raise, which finally let me buy that house in Arlington. Every night before my shift, I video call Emma and tell her I love her, because you never know when someone's past demons might crawl out of the shadows. And I always check the vents. This happened back in 2018, when I was working as a flight attendant for a major airline. I was 26, living in a small studio apartment in Queens, and had just gotten the job after years of trying to break into the industry. The pay wasn't great, but I loved the travel perks and meeting new people every day. My route was mostly domestic, Chicago to New York, sometimes Boston, nothing too exotic. I remember feeling so proud wearing that uniform, thinking I'd finally made it to where I wanted to be in life. The first time I noticed Marcus, it was a typical Tuesday morning flight from O'Hare to LaGuardia. Business class was packed with the usual crowd, executives in their press suits tapping away on laptops before we even took off. He sat in 2B, ordered a black coffee with exactly 2 sugars, and thanked me with this warm, genuine smile. What struck me was how he actually looked me in the eye when he spoke, not through me like most passengers did. He had this salt and pepper beard, probably mid-40s, wearing a navy blazer that looked expensive but not showy. Just another businessman commuting for work, I thought. Over the next few weeks, Marcus became a regular on my flights. Not every single one, but enough that I started recognizing him before checking the manifest. He'd always greet me by name, "Morning, Sarah," with that same pleasant smile, and ask how my day was going. Normal stuff, really. Flight attendants develop these little relationships with frequent flyers. It makes the job feel less robotic. He told me he worked in consulting, split his time between offices. He'd share little jokes about airport food or ask for restaurant recommendations in New York. I actually looked forward to seeing him on the passenger list. The shift started happening so gradually that I almost missed it. One morning, maybe 6 weeks after I'd first met him, Marcus mentioned this little Thai place in Astoria. "You'd love their pad see ew," he said, then added casually, "It's probably walking distance from your neighborhood." I'd never told him where I lived, just that I was based in New York. When I laughed it off, saying I lived in Queens but not Astoria, he quickly corrected himself. "Oh, I just assumed since you mentioned that farmer's market you go to." The thing is, I had mentioned a farmer's market once, weeks ago, in passing. The fact that he remembered such a tiny detail felt intense. After that, Marcus's comments became more specific, more personal. He'd ask about my cat, Mochi, but I couldn't remember ever mentioning I had a cat. When I posted a photo from my college reunion on Instagram, he brought it up the next flight. "Northwestern, right? Beautiful campus. Did you study communications there?" My profile was private and we weren't connected on any social media. When I asked how he knew, he just laughed and said he was good at reading people, that I seemed like a Northwestern girl. The way he said it made my skin crawl, but I forced myself to smile and pour his coffee. Things escalated during a particularly rough week in November. I'd been dealing with a death in the family. My grandmother had passed, and took a few days off. When I returned to work, Marcus was on my first flight back. Before I could even start the safety demonstration, he pulled me aside and said, "Sarah, I'm so sorry about your grandmother. Margaret seemed like such a special woman. My blood turned to ice. I'd posted nothing online about her death, and I definitely hadn't told him her name. When I asked how he knew, he touched my arm gently and said, "You mentioned she was sick last month, remember? And I saw the obituary in the Cedar Rapids Gazette online. I hope you don't mind. I wanted to send flowers but didn't have an address." That night in my hotel room, I went through every conversation I could remember having with him. Yes, I'd mentioned my grandmother was ill, but never her name, never what city she lived in. I started checking my social media settings, making everything as private as possible. I even Googled myself to see what information was out there. That's when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. In one of my old college photos that a friend had tagged me in, you could see my Northwestern student ID partially visible. If you zoomed in enough, you could make out my full name and hometown, Cedar Rapids, Iowa. The real terror began during a layover in Chicago 2 weeks later. I was staying at the airport Marriott, the same hotel the airline always booked for us. Around 10 p.m., I went down to the lobby to grab a tea from the little market they had. As I was waiting for the elevator to go back up, I saw Marcus sitting in the lobby bar scrolling through his phone. My first thought was coincidence. Lots of business travelers stayed there. But when I caught his eye, he didn't look surprised to see me. He raised his glass slightly, that familiar smile spreading across his face, and mouthed, "Hi, Sarah." I practically ran into the elevator, jabbing the close button over and over. The next morning, I tried to convince myself I was overreacting. Maybe he had a meeting nearby, maybe it really was just coincidence. But when I walked into the hotel restaurant for breakfast, there he was again, sitting alone with a newspaper and coffee. This time he waved me over enthusiastically. "Sarah, what are the odds? Join me for breakfast?" When I politely declined, saying I needed to prep for my flight, he said something that chilled me. "Oh, the 11:40 to LaGuardia? Don't worry, you've got plenty of time. That crew van doesn't leave until 10:15. He was right. The crew van schedule wasn't public information. I started documenting everything after that. Every encounter, every comment that seemed too personal, every time he appeared where he shouldn't be. 3 times in December, I spotted him at different hotels during my layovers, always in public spaces, always with that plausible deniability of being just another guest. He'd discovered my patterns. The Starbucks near the Detroit airport where I'd grab coffee on early mornings. The yoga studio in Chicago where I'd sometimes squeeze in a class between flights. Once I came out of a CVS in Manhattan to find him walking past, shopping bag in hand, acting surprised to bump into me. "Small world," he'd said, but his timing was too perfect. The breaking point came during a red-eye flight from San Francisco. I wasn't supposed to be working that route. I'd picked it up last minute when another attendant called in sick. Yet there was Marcus, settling into his usual 2B seat. When I expressed surprise at seeing him on this flight, he said, "Oh, I had to change my plans last minute too. Funny how things work out." That's when I knew he was tracking me somehow. Later, a tech-savvy coworker showed me these flight attendant fan forums where people post about crew schedules and share photos. She also mentioned flight tracking apps that let you see crew changes in real time if you know where to look. Some frequent flyers apparently use them to request specific attendance. I finally went to my supervisor, Lauren, with my documentation. I sat in her office, showing her dates, times, photos I'd managed to take of Marcus at various locations. She listened carefully, nodding along, but I could see the doubt creeping into her expression. "Sarah, I understand this is concerning," she said slowly. "But has he actually done anything threatening? Made any inappropriate advances? Touched you inappropriately?" When I said no, she sighed. "Look, he's a platinum member, flies with us almost weekly. Without concrete evidence of stalking or harassment, legal definitions, not just feeling uncomfortable, there's not much we can do. Maybe he just travels a lot to the same cities you do?" That night, I called my best friend Emma, who worked as a paralegal. She confirmed what I already feared. Without explicit threats or physical harassment, proving stalking was nearly impossible. Document everything, she advised. Get a restraining order if he escalates. Maybe change your routes? But changing routes meant giving up seniority I'd worked years to build. It meant letting him win. I spent hours researching online, finding dozens of similar stories from flight attendants, bartenders, retail workers, people in customer service jobs trapped by professional courtesy while someone slowly invaded their life. The situation reached a crescendo on a snowy January evening. I'd just finished a long day of flights and was walking to my apartment from the subway when I noticed footprints in the fresh snow leading to my building's entrance, then veering off toward the alley beside it. Something made me look closer. There, barely visible in the dim light between buildings, was Marcus. He was standing perfectly still, phone held up, aimed at my living room window. When he saw me notice him, he didn't run or hide. He simply lowered his phone, gave me that same polite smile, and walked away calmly, like a man who knew he'd face no consequences. I called the police immediately, but by the time they arrived, he was long gone. The officers took my statement, looked at my documentation, but explained that without video evidence or witnesses, it was my word against his. One officer, a woman about my age, pulled me aside afterward. "Between you and me," she said quietly, "guys like this know exactly how far they can push without crossing legal lines. Have you considered getting security cameras? Maybe staying with friends for a while?" That night, I installed a doorbell camera and 2 more inside my apartment. I changed my social media names, went completely dark online, and started varying my routine obsessively. The next time I saw Marcus on a flight manifest, I called in sick. Then I did it again, and again. After 3 weeks of this, Lauren called me into her office. The company was concerned about my attendance, she said. When I explained why, she offered me a choice: take an unpaid leave to sort things out, or accept a transfer to international flights, a demotion that would cost me thousands in salary. I took the international routes. My first flight to London, I spent the entire time looking over my shoulder, expecting to see him in business class. He wasn't there. For 6 months now, I haven't seen him once. Sometimes I check the passenger lists for my old routes, and his name is still there, regular as clockwork. Chicago to New York to Chicago. I wonder if there's another flight attendant now, someone new and friendly, who thinks Marcus is just another pleasant regular. Someone who hasn't yet noticed how he remembers every little detail she mentions. The plan was simple. 1 last month of clean flights, no turbulence, no drama, and I'd wrap up nearly 3 decades in the cockpit. That night flight from Vegas to Phoenix was supposed to be one of the easiest. Barely an hour in the air, clear skies, light load, no weather alerts. I'd done it so many times I could almost do it blindfolded. Not that I ever would, obviously. I wasn't sentimental about flying, not like some of the guys who kept journals or took Polaroids from the cockpit. I just liked the order of it. Checklists, schedules, numbers that lined up. Predictable. And that's probably what made what happened that night so hard to accept. It didn't line up. It didn't follow the rules. Our departure from McCarran was textbook. First Officer Denise, sharp, reliable, handled most of the comms while I monitored instruments and guided us out. It was late, somewhere around 10:40 p.m., and the cabin lights were dimmed. Most of the 83 passengers were already drifting off, earbuds in, tray tables up. Cabin crew was minimal, just 2 attendants, Eric and Lacey. Nothing seemed out of place. We reached cruising altitude with no issue, leveled out, and I remember Denise cracking a joke about retiring to Arizona being just code for golfing yourself to death. We laughed. I actually felt relaxed, which is rare for me mid-flight. Roughly 20 minutes before descent, I noticed a slight flicker on the nav display. Not unheard of. Sometimes it's just minor interference. But then it flickered again, and this time the entire lateral path shifted. Just for a second, the screen showed us veering off course, by a lot. A jarring red line arced us into restricted military airspace to the south, which made no sense. Denise saw it too and immediately tapped the system to recalibrate. Before she could finish, the screens corrected themselves. Everything looked normal again. Autopilot hadn't disengaged. No audible warnings. Just a sudden detour and instant reset. I felt this strange pressure in my chest, like the moment before a dive. But nothing around us had changed. We both double-checked coordinates, even asked ATC for confirmation of our position. They responded like everything was fine. No anomalies, no deviations. But the nav system hiccuped 2 more times in the next 10 minutes. Each time it showed us veering off into that same off-limits airspace for maybe half a second before correcting itself. The third time, the comms glitched too. Static. Sharp, crackling, but brief. I'd heard interference before, but this wasn't weather. It had a rhythm to it, almost like Morse code, but not any I could decipher. Denise didn't say much. I could tell she was trying to stay composed, but I saw her jaw clench when I told her not to mention it to the cabin crew just yet. We made it to final approach without any more disruptions. The descent was smooth, no weather to fight, visibility clear all the way down, but I couldn't shake the tension from my shoulders. My eyes kept flicking to the panels like they were going to betray me again. When we touched down, it was a clean landing, not even a bump. Passengers applauded lightly, like they do when they're relieved but don't know why. We taxied to the gate, parked, shut down. If anyone noticed anything strange, they didn't say a word. Denise gave me a quick glance while gathering her bag. Just a flicker of unspoken agreement that something had been wrong up there. Not broken, just wrong in a way we couldn't put our fingers on. Back in the crew lounge, I filed the maintenance log like always. I debated whether to even include the glitch, but something about it gnawed at me. I marked it under non-critical navigation irregularity and flagged it for engineering. 2 techs looked at it the next morning, ran the usual diagnostics. Everything came back normal, not even a hint of malfunction. They shrugged it off, chalked it up to software lag, minor interference, the kind of things they see all the time but rarely mean anything. But I couldn't let it go. Something about how exact the detours had been, like they weren't random, like someone had chosen that path. A few days later, I got a call from someone on the investigation team. He didn't sound alarmed, just focused. Said they'd reviewed the flight data and noticed anomalies in the communication logs during our descent. Apparently, there were bursts of signal interruption that didn't match anything typical for that route. No weather interference, no equipment failure, nothing internal. It looked to them like it came from outside, possibly even targeted. He asked if I knew anyone on board, passengers or crew, who might have had access to any sort of unauthorized comm equipment. I laughed at first. It sounded paranoid. But then he said, "We're not talking about a prank. This was a directed signal. Someone knew exactly what they were doing." That's when everything turned. I started replaying the flight in my head over and over. Who boarded first, who looked nervous, who didn't make eye contact. I remembered a man in 14A sitting stiff with a leather duffel on his lap the whole time. A woman near the back who never removed her sunglasses, even at night. One of the flight attendants, Lacey, had asked me just before boarding if this model of aircraft had a specific type of relay box in the back galley. It didn't strike me as odd at the time, but now, why would she ask that? I didn't know what to think. Suddenly, I wasn't just second-guessing a machine. I was second-guessing people I'd spent hours locked in the sky with. I didn't sleep much that week. I'd wake up thinking about those flickers on the screen and that static in my headset, hearing it play back in my head like it had a message buried inside. I didn't tell my wife the full story, just that there had been a minor tech issue on the flight. She's heard enough flight talk over the years to know when I'm brushing something off. But even if I'd tried to explain it, I don't think she would have understood the part that really got to me. The idea that someone might have been trying to send us somewhere specific. Not just interfere, but redirect. That's the part that sticks. I don't know what would have happened if we hadn't caught it fast enough. A week later, I was called into a debrief with 2 FAA officials and someone from airline security. They didn't accuse anyone by name, but they confirmed that the disruptions weren't random. Someone had piggybacked onto the plane's navigational frequency for short bursts, masking the source. It was subtle, surgical, almost. They asked about the passenger manifest, the crew, whether anything unusual had happened on the ground before boarding. They even reviewed security footage from the Vegas gate. I asked if they had any leads, but they wouldn't say, just thanked me for logging the incident and told me the case would stay open internally. I ended up filing for early leave a few weeks later. My last flight was supposed to be in September, but after that night I didn't want to go back up. Something changed in me. It wasn't just the fear of something going wrong, it was the fear of not knowing who to trust. Not knowing if the person smiling at you across the galley knows more than they should, or if that quiet guy with the duffel bag even planned to make it to Phoenix. I've run through every scenario in my head, but I'll never know what the real goal was. Whether it was me they were targeting or someone else on that plane, to this day I still think about that night. Every time I see a flight path on a screen, I double-check it without meaning to. Old habits, maybe. Or maybe I'm still trying to find something I missed. The airline never gave a public statement. No headlines, no media leaks. It was buried like a glitch in the system. But I know what I saw. I know what I felt in that cockpit when the systems veered just a few degrees south, toward a place we weren't supposed to be. And I know it wasn't an accident. Whoever did that, they were watching us, and they were close. I work in tech, but not the glamorous side most people picture when they hear that. I deal with databases for a logistics company, the kind of job that makes your eyes blur from screens and your back ache from office chairs that weren't designed for actual human spines. The flight to London was a last-minute decision. My company had closed a deal with a partner overseas, and someone needed to fly out for a face-to-face handoff. I'd never been to Europe, so I volunteered, thinking a free trip across the Atlantic might balance out the jet lag and panic of preparing everything in 48 hours. I packed light, grabbed my work laptop, and boarded the red-eye from Boston Logan with the simple hope of catching some sleep and surviving the time zone change. The plane wasn't full, which surprised me. I had an entire row to myself in economy, which felt like winning the lottery. A few rows behind me, on the left side near the rear galley, there was an older man who caught my attention early on, not because he did anything strange, but because he looked so completely out of place. While most people were half asleep in hoodies or neck pillows, this guy wore a perfectly pressed beige blazer, wire-rimmed glasses, and a buttoned-up shirt with no wrinkles. He reminded me of someone you'd see in a library commercial, kind, quiet, and maybe a little too proper for a cramped overnight flight. He didn't speak to anyone, didn't fiddle with the screen, just sat calmly with his hands folded on his lap and a small leather bag under the seat in front of him. We took off around 9:45 p.m., and the cabin lights dimmed not long after dinner service. I tried watching something on the screen but gave up after 10 minutes and curled up against the window with a blanket over my face. Sometime in the middle of the night, maybe halfway through the flight, I stirred awake when someone brushed past me on their way to the back. I glanced up just long enough to see the man from a few rows back walking toward the lavatory. He moved slowly but steadily, like he had a destination and wasn't in a hurry to reach it. I remember thinking it was weird he hadn't gotten up earlier, and also that he didn't have anything with him, not even shoes, just socks and those stiff dress pants. I fell asleep again for what couldn't have been more than 40 minutes, and when I woke up, something didn't feel right. Not in a horror movie kind of way, just a vague tension in the cabin. The lights were still low, but some people had started to stir. One of the attendants passed by doing a quiet check, and I watched her pause near the back, then double back, peering down the row where that man had been sitting. I sat up, feeling that odd instinct people get when they notice someone else noticing something. The attendant leaned toward the empty seat, looked down at the floor, and even opened the overhead bin above. She whispered something into the intercom phone on the wall, then walked off toward the galley with this stiffness in her posture that made me feel like I shouldn't be watching. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe he'd been in the lavatory for a while, and they were just checking on him. But about 20 minutes later, I noticed 2 flight attendants standing near the galley whispering, one of them holding what looked like the passenger manifest. They kept looking down the aisle, then back at the paper, then back at the aisle again. Eventually, one of them made her way up the cabin, lightly touching shoulders, quietly asking questions. When she got to me, she crouched beside my seat and asked if I had noticed the gentleman in seat 41A getting up during the flight. I told her I had, that I'd seen him go toward the back maybe an hour or so ago. She gave me this polite, tight-lipped nod and thanked me, but didn't elaborate. About 30 minutes before descent, the lighting shifted and the bustle of preparation began. People started waking up fully. Tray tables were locked, windows adjusted. But now there was this strange undercurrent. It wasn't panic, but you could feel the ripple. The attendants weren't smiling anymore. There were quiet conversations in the galley, a male attendant going down the aisle with a flashlight, crouching here and there as if double-checking something. I glanced back again toward the man's seat. His little leather bag was still tucked under the seat in front of it, the blanket folded neatly, tray table upright. No sign that he'd ever come back. When we landed in London, they made an announcement asking everyone to remain seated for a few extra minutes due to a discrepancy in the manifest. That's not a phrase you hear every day. A murmur spread through the cabin. People started exchanging glances, asking questions. I heard someone behind me mutter, "What the hell is going on?" while their seatmate whispered something about a medical emergency, but nobody had seen a paramedic board. The crew looked visibly tense by then, like they'd already been given some kind of instruction they weren't allowed to talk about. After about 10 more minutes, they let us disembark, but as I walked past the back rows, I slowed down and looked again. Seat 41A was empty, spotless, and still had that leather bag untouched under it. At customs, we were pulled aside in small groups. Not detained exactly, but definitely questioned. I was asked if I remembered anyone sitting near me, if I'd spoken to any strangers, if I noticed anything unusual during the flight. When I mentioned the man getting up, the official noted it down but didn't react much, just a nod and a scribble. I asked if something had happened, and the guy gave me a tight smile and said, "Thanks for your cooperation." That was it. The man had vanished. Not moved seats, not had a medical issue. He was simply gone, mid-flight, without anyone seeing him leave or return. No alarms, no disturbances, no trace. Just gone. Back at the hotel that night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying everything in my head. His outfit, the way he walked, how calm he looked. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how strange it was that he never made eye contact with anyone, never interacted. No flight attendants checked on him before he got up, and no one ever seemed to serve him dinner. It's like he was just there. A presence. I even started to question if I'd imagined him, but I wasn't the only one who'd seen him. In an airport cafe the next day, I ran into a woman from the same flight. She'd been seated across the aisle from him. We ended up talking, and she swore she remembered him getting up in the middle of the night, too. "He left his bag," she said, her voice low. "Who goes to the bathroom on an international flight without taking a passport or meds or anything?" A few weeks after I got home, someone from some federal agency, I won't say which, called me to verify my statement. It wasn't just the airline investigating at that point. They asked the same things again in a more formal tone. They never said it, but I could tell they were trying to rule out foul play or a security breach. But here's the part that still gives me chills. I looked up flight logs and passenger incident reports trying to make sense of it, and there's no public record of anyone disappearing on that flight. Not even a mention of an investigation. Like it got scrubbed. I even submitted a request to the airline pretending to be a journalist, and the response I got back simply said, "We have no information regarding a missing person on the flight in question." I know what I saw. I know the guy existed. Seat 41A, beige blazer, leather bag. And I'm not the only one who saw him. But if you go looking now, it's like he was never on that plane. His name was on the manifest, yes. But it didn't match any passport logs from Boston or Heathrow. Airport CCTV never captured him boarding or deplaning. Nothing. Just a name and a seat and a vanished man. I've flown maybe 5 times since then, and every time I do, I watch the aisle. I count the heads. I look for someone too still, too quiet, too disconnected from the rest of us, because I don't know what I witnessed that night. But I'm sure of this. Whatever it wasn't normal, and it wasn't meant to be noticed. I think about him more than I should. Not because I'm scared something will happen to me, but because I wonder if someone else noticed him disappear before. Maybe this wasn't the first time. Maybe there are others. I still check forums from time to time, searching for anyone who's posted something similar. So far, nothing. But if you're reading this and you were on that flight, or any flight where someone just went missing, please say something, even if nobody believes you, because I saw it happen. And I'm done pretending I didn't. There was a stretch of time when I was flying constantly for work. Conferences, pitches, client visits. That night was one of those last-minute red-eyes where I barely made it to the gate in time. I just wrapped up a presentation in Denver, and the only thing on my mind was sleep. I was mentally drained, physically sore from lugging my suitcase through terminals all week, and already dreading the early morning meeting waiting for me in DC. All I cared about when I boarded was that 22C had an aisle. Window seats made me feel boxed in, and I liked having the freedom to get up when I wanted. It wasn't much, but it was one small comfort in a week that had been anything but. A guy, maybe in his early 40s, approached me just as I was getting ready to put in my headphones. He was tall, wiry build, dressed like a businessman but without the polish. Navy blazer, no tie, hair slightly damp like he'd sprinted through the airport. He looked at my seat number, then at me, and asked, politely at first, if we could switch. He had the middle seat in the next row up, but said he had a small bladder and needed easy access to the bathroom. I hesitated, not because I didn't believe him, but because I knew I wouldn't sleep sandwiched between strangers. But he was persistent, even offering to help me with my bag. He seemed nervous, but not in a threatening way, just jittery. I caved. I regretted it almost immediately. The guy in the window seat beside me snored like he'd swallowed a chainsaw, and the middle seat wasn't just tight, it was cramped to the point I couldn't even cross my legs. I tried to sleep, but every little sound kept nudging me awake. I remember sometime around 3 a.m., the turbulence got worse. Not the shaky kind that jolts you for a few seconds and passes, but that longer, rolling kind that makes you question how solid the air beneath you really is. The seatbelt light blinked on, and flight attendants moved quickly down the aisle, checking that trays were up, belts buckled. That's when I noticed him. The man I'd switched seats with was standing up, not far from the front of the plane, whispering aggressively with 2 flight attendants near the cockpit. It wasn't a loud argument, but the tension in their posture was unmistakable. One of the attendants had her arms crossed and kept glancing toward the cockpit door, while the other gestured subtly toward the man's seat, as if asking him to sit back down. I watched for a while, unsure if I was witnessing an air rage incident or something else entirely. Then he turned around, saw me watching, and smiled. This weird, thin-lipped smile like he was trying to play it off. I looked away immediately and pretended to sleep. The rest of the flight felt longer than it should have. He eventually went back to his seat, but I kept checking the aisle out of the corner of my eye. There was this lingering energy, like something hadn't settled. Every time someone got up to use the restroom, I tensed, half expecting another scene. The lights were dimmed. Most people were asleep or trying to be, but I couldn't shut my mind off. I kept replaying that moment by the cockpit in my head, wondering what they'd been talking about so quietly yet so urgently. and I couldn't shake the look the flight attendant gave me when she walked past again, like she was still on edge. We landed around 6 a.m. at Dulles, that groggy hour when everything feels hazy and rushed. People stood up the second the seatbelt sign turned off, even though we still had 10 minutes of waiting. I stayed seated like I usually do, letting the crowd thin before grabbing my bag. But then the plane didn't open right away. A voice came over the intercom, calm but rehearsed, and asked everyone to remain seated while a matter was being handled. That phrase alone made people uneasy. I remember hearing a woman behind me mutter, "That can't be good," while her kid kicked the back of my seat. 3 federal agents boarded, not TSA, not airport staff, agents wearing dark jackets with small official lettering. No one moved. It was like the entire front of the plane collectively held its breath. They walked straight down the aisle without hesitation, stopped right where I'd originally been sitting, 22C, and told the man now sitting there, the same guy who asked to switch with me, to stand up. No reading of rights, no drawn weapons, just a firm instruction. He looked completely calm, not surprised, not panicked, just ready. He stood, adjusted his blazer, and followed them off the plane like he'd been expecting it. The woman in the window seat next to him looked completely stunned, her face pale as chalk. It took a few minutes before the rest of us were allowed to disembark. There wasn't much talk, just a quiet stream of passengers walking off, some glancing toward the front like they expected to see more agents waiting. I didn't say anything until I got to the terminal, and that's when one of the flight attendants, same one who'd been arguing with him, pulled me aside. She asked if I had any idea what the man had said to me, or why he'd wanted my seat. I told her everything, word for word. She nodded slowly, then told me very carefully that there'd been something hidden under my original seat. Something serious enough that the airline was cooperating with federal investigators. That's all she would say. But the way she looked at me, there was a weight behind her eyes. Like she knew I had no idea how close I'd come to being involved in something I never would have walked away from. I didn't go straight to my hotel. I just wandered the terminal for a while, trying to piece everything together. I kept replaying the moment he asked to switch seats, how casual it had seemed, how easy it was to just say yes. And now I couldn't stop thinking about what would have happened if I'd stayed in 22C. Would they have arrested me instead? Would I have been detained, questioned, dragged into something I didn't understand? I started spiraling, imagining headlines, mugshots, my name connected to something I didn't do. It scared me how fast things could have gone wrong over a simple, polite favor. Later that night, I couldn't sleep. I searched news alerts, Twitter, local channels, anything. But there was nothing. Not a single mention of a man arrested on a flight, no statement from the airline. It was like it never happened. The next day, I even called the airline's customer service pretending to have left something under the seat, just to see if they'd say anything. The rep just apologized and said the item had been confiscated for safety reasons and that no further information could be given. That word, confiscated, hit different. It wasn't lost or turned in. It was removed. To this day, I don't know what was under that seat. I don't know if it was drugs, a weapon, something worse. But the idea that he deliberately chose someone, me, to sit in his place, that's what really messed me up. He needed someone who looked normal, forgettable, someone tired enough to agree to a last-minute switch without question. And I was perfect for that. He probably scanned the whole gate and zeroed in on me because I looked like I just wanted to sleep and disappear into the background. He was right. Since then, I haven't flown without thinking about that night. I still take aisle seats when I can, but I never, ever switch. Even if someone has a broken leg or a sob story, I keep my spot. I don't care if it makes me rude. Because that night on a crowded plane, one polite decision almost turned me into a suspect, or worse, a pawn. I walked off that flight thinking I was just lucky. But the more I think about it, maybe I wasn't the lucky one. Maybe I was just the one who said yes too fast. I was flying regional routes out of Minneapolis that winter, mostly short hops to smaller airports across the Midwest. That night, our last leg was supposed to be an easy one, just a quick jump to a quiet airstrip in rural Wisconsin and back. But the snow came in fast and heavy, the kind that clings to the windows and sheets and makes runways vanish like they were never there. By the time we landed, air traffic control had grounded everything. No flights in or out. We were stuck until morning, along with the 2 other crew members I was flying with. Kevin, our younger flight tech who talked too fast when he was nervous, and Elise, my roommate on layovers and probably the most unshakable person I knew. The airport was smaller than most bus stations I've seen, bare bones, a single terminal with dim lights and rows of empty metal chairs. There were vending machines in the corner, and one of those old-school PA systems that crackled every hour to remind absolutely no one that the terminal was closing. The ground crew had already left by the time we stepped off the plane, and the cleaning staff was just finishing up. A janitor, maybe in his 60s, gave us a polite nod before heading out the sliding doors. Said something about locking up behind him. Elise laughed. Looks like we've got the place to ourselves. At the time, that didn't sound like a bad thing. We set up camp near the gates using airline blankets and the kind of thin pillows passengers always complain about. The 3 of us had done this kind of thing before. Unexpected overnights, weather delays, sleeping in weird places. I passed the time walking laps around the terminal while Elise scrolled through her phone and Kevin tried to sleep across a row of seats. Around 1 a.m., I went to use the restroom. That's when I noticed the first thing that didn't make sense. The hallway lights had been dimmed, but you could still make out the sheen on the floor where it had been mopped. Someone had walked through it, clear prints leading into the staff-only corridor. None of us had gone that way. I stood there for a second, staring down the hall like maybe the floor was playing tricks on me. But the prints were fresh. Not muddy from outside, just outlined from someone walking across drying cleaner. I thought about waking Elise, but stopped myself. We were locked in, right? Maybe the janitor had circled back to grab something. Maybe he'd forgotten to set the alarm. It was late, I was tired, and I didn't want to seem paranoid. Still, I found myself checking over my shoulder as I walked back, telling myself not to be weird. Then I noticed the supply closet next to the vending machines was cracked open. I could have sworn it had been shut earlier. I nudged the closet door open with the tip of my shoe, half expecting to see a mop bucket or some folded towels. Instead, it was pitch black inside. No light switch in sight. I didn't step in, just stood there listening. Nothing. But there was this weird smell, like old water mixed with something metallic. I don't know how else to describe it. Not strong, just stale. I shut the door without checking further. When I got back to the gate area, Kevin was out cold and Elise had her earbuds in, flipping through a tabloid magazine like she was waiting at a salon. I didn't mention the footprints or the closet. Again, I told myself it wasn't a big deal. At some point, I must have dozed off too. It wasn't deep sleep, more like a series of flickers in and out. Around 3:30 a.m., I woke up suddenly to a soft bang, like a door slamming somewhere far down the terminal. I sat up, blinking toward the far end, but didn't see anyone. The lights were even dimmer now, and everything had that eerie blue-gray cast from the emergency bulbs. Elise was gone. Her blanket was still there, her bag beside it, but no sign of her. Kevin was stirring, rubbing his eyes, confused. "Where'd Elise go?" he asked, half asleep. I didn't know what to say. We waited maybe 5 minutes, thinking she'd just gone to the bathroom or wandered off to stretch her legs. But something felt wrong. Elise wasn't the type to disappear quietly. I walked the length of the terminal, checking the restrooms, even knocking on the office doors behind the ticket counters. Nothing. No response. The weirdest part? That closet, the one I'd seen open earlier, was shut now. And this time I was certain I hadn't touched it. Kevin and I looked at each other, silently agreeing something wasn't right. We decided to stick together while we looked again. 15 minutes later, Elise came back. She appeared from the end of the hallway near baggage claim, walking slowly like she was lost in thought. Her face looked pale, her eyes almost dazed, and when we rushed up asking where she'd been, she barely responded. Just mumbled something about getting air and needing space. I asked if she'd gone outside, but the doors were still locked from the inside. No alarm had gone off. She sat down, pulled her blanket over her legs, and didn't say another word. Even Kevin, who never shuts up, didn't push her. Something about her expression told us not to. After that, none of us really slept. We just sat in silence, watching the minutes crawl across the wall clock. Elise wouldn't look at us. She kept her eyes fixed on the windows, like she was expecting something to show up on the other side. Kevin tried to distract himself by scrolling through his phone, but the signal was garbage, and the Wi-Fi didn't seem to work anymore. I remember getting up one more time to grab water from the vending machine, and when I turned back toward our little camp, I caught a glimpse of movement, something fast, ducking behind one of the far pillars near Gate 4. I didn't say anything. I just walked back slowly and sat down, pretending nothing had happened, but my heart was thudding and I couldn't stop watching that hallway after that. Around 5:15, we heard it again. Soft thud, then a dragging sound like something being pulled across tile. Kevin stood up this time, actually grabbing one of those airport courtesy poles they use to rope off lines. "It's probably maintenance," he whispered, more to himself than to me. But nobody came out of that corridor. I could barely see the end of it with the lights so low, but there was no doubt someone or something was moving back there, out of sight. That dragging noise stopped suddenly, and we just waited. No footsteps, no voices, just a silence so thick it felt like we were underwater. We stayed in that position for over an hour, barely moving. At first light, the automatic doors unlocked with a loud metallic click, startling all three of us. The first ground crew employee walked in holding a coffee, pausing when he saw us sitting there like we hadn't moved all night. He asked if everything was all right. Kevin nodded before I could speak. Elise didn't even look up. We gathered our things in silence. None of us wanted to be the one to explain why it felt like we were being watched all night. I kept expecting to see another set of footprints on the floor or someone standing just out of view behind the glass. But there was nothing. Just the quiet hum of morning shift starting. It took a few days before Elise opened up, and even then, it wasn't much. She said she'd gone to look for the bathroom and ended up in the old service corridor. Thought she saw someone standing at the far end just still, like they were waiting for her. She said she turned around and walked the other way, but the lights started going out behind her, one by one. No footsteps, no voices, just a hallway getting darker, faster than she could walk. She wouldn't go into more detail. We haven't worked the same flight since. Sometimes I still get assigned to that route, but I always request a hotel now, even if it means paying out of pocket. I'd rather sleep in a roach motel than spend another night locked inside that place. I've always preferred working from home, where I can control the lighting, the temperature, and most importantly, the ground beneath my feet. But when the company announced a high-stakes client presentation in Seattle and made it clear they wanted all department leads there in person, I couldn't really say no. I'm a software engineer, not a salesman. But for some reason, they insisted I be the one to explain the back-end system to the client. So there I was, boarding a regional flight out of SFO with a suit bag, a tablet full of diagrams, and the kind of tension in my chest that no amount of Dramamine can fix. The flight was short, barely 2 hours, but I remember every minute of it. It was midweek, cloudy, and I had barely slept the night before. The plane itself was one of those smaller Embraer jets, cramped enough that every cough felt like it echoed off the walls. My seat was toward the back, near the wing, where you feel everything more intensely. There was a couple to my left who argued under their breath the entire time about who packed what, and across the aisle sat a kid watching cartoons on full volume until the flight attendant politely asked his mom to lower it. Normal stuff, honestly. Nothing that stood out. Things changed about halfway into the flight, right as we crossed into Oregon airspace. Without warning, the plane dipped sharply, and trays snapped open like they were spring-loaded. People gasped. One guy near the front actually shouted. The seatbelt sign came back on, and the flight attendants went still, holding onto the armrests or the backs of seats. It wasn't a brief jolt either. The turbulence stayed with us, stretching from seconds into minutes. The lights flickered once, twice, and that was when I noticed him. 3 rows ahead, aisle seat. He looked maybe late 30s, clean-shaven, with a buzz cut and a green windbreaker that made him look like someone who worked outdoors. What caught my eye wasn't him exactly. It was his phone. He was typing like a madman, his thumbs moving so fast it didn't even look like he was reading what he wrote. The screen brightness was cranked up high, probably because of the flickering cabin lights, and I caught fragments of what he was sending. This is it. We deserve this. Forgive me. One message after another, all to the same number. He wasn't panicking like the rest of us. He looked purposeful, focused, almost calm in the middle of the chaos, like he had been waiting for this moment. At first, I tried to convince myself that maybe he was just scared. People say weird stuff when they think they're going to die. But something about the way he kept looking straight ahead, not reacting to the shaking, not glancing around like everyone else. It didn't sit right. I leaned slightly into the aisle to get a better look, careful not to seem obvious. The man didn't flinch. He just kept typing, sending message after message, his eyes locked on the seat back in front of him. And then I saw it. He smiled. Not a friendly smile, not relief. It was quick, small, like someone who just got confirmation that everything was going according to plan. The turbulence let up about 10 minutes later. The pilot came on the speaker and blamed it on a storm front shifting east. The usual reassuring tone, though it cracked a little near the end, like even he had been thrown. The cabin eased back into an uncomfortable calm, but people were different now. More quiet, more alert. The kid had stopped watching cartoons, and the arguing couple had gone completely silent. I kept my eyes on the man in the green windbreaker. He had stopped texting. His phone was now in his lap, screen dark, and his hands were folded neatly on top of it. He looked like someone patiently waiting for a verdict. We landed at SeaTac a little behind schedule. The captain apologized and thanked us for flying with them. As soon as the plane touched the ground and the brakes screeched against the runway, people let out that collective exhale you always hear at the end of a rough flight. But that guy, he stood up the second the seatbelt light dinged off and grabbed a small black backpack from under the seat in front of him. No overhead bin, no suitcase. He weaved through the narrow aisle before anyone else had even unclicked their belts and disappeared down the jet bridge like he was on a mission. No expression, no eye contact. Just gone. I looked around to see if anyone else had noticed. A woman near me raised her eyebrows like, "What was that?" but didn't say anything. The rest of the passengers moved slowly, gathering their bags and avoiding each other's eyes, like we had all quietly agreed not to talk about what had just happened. As I stepped into the terminal, I scanned the crowd, half expecting to see the man in the green jacket being stopped or questioned, or even just walking fast toward a gate. But he wasn't there. He had completely vanished, not even at baggage claim. And that's when it started to really bother me, because there was no reason for someone to act like that, unless they were either running from something or had already done something. Later that evening at the hotel, I tried to shake it off. I told myself it had just been a rough flight, and the guy was probably just weird or dramatic. But curiosity kept chewing at me. I opened a private browser tab and searched the flight number along with terms like incident and passenger removed. Nothing. No arrests, no news reports, not even a tweet. Then I searched the exact phrasing I'd seen on his phone. "We deserve this, and forgive me." That opened a rabbit hole I wish I hadn't gone down. Old forum threads, manifesto excerpts, creepy YouTube rants. Some of them use those exact same lines. I started to wonder if I'd just watched someone on the edge of doing something truly terrible, and then changed their mind at the last second. The next morning I brought it up casually, during the coffee break at the client meeting. One of the other passengers from the flight, a woman named Paula, who had also been heading to the same presentation, overheard and immediately turned to me. She said she saw him too. Not the text, but she remembered how fast he got off the plane. Said she thought it was odd how calm he looked, considering how rough the flight had been. That gave me chills. It wasn't just in my head. Someone else had seen the same thing, felt that same silent alarm ringing. When I got back home to San Jose a few days later, I reported what I saw to the airline's customer service. Not the kind of thing I ever expected to do, but I needed to get it off my chest. They took down my statement but didn't offer much beyond the scripted, "Thank you for your concern." I don't know if they followed up. I don't even know if they could. No one asked for passenger names on those short domestic flights unless there's a reason, but I can't forget his face, or how certain he looked, like he'd made peace with something before we even hit the worst of the turbulence. I haven't flown since. I drive now, even to places that take 2 days on the road. Maybe that's extreme. Maybe he was just a strange guy with a twisted sense of humor or a bad day. But in that cabin, with the lights flickering and the plane rattling like it was being pulled apart mid-air, I watched a man say goodbye. Not to anyone in particular, but to something. And if he changed his mind last minute, I'll never know why. But I think about it often. Not because of what happened, but because of what almost did.